Do you want to produce nearly 2,000 plastic and rubber from just 600 crude oil? Hi, I'm Dr. Goose. I have a PhD in chemical engineering. I got nerd sniped by Satisfactory, and you're gonna sit through my petrochemical yield PowerPoint. You want to make plastic and rubber. There's one default recipe. It takes crude oil, it makes plastic and rubber. You have heavy oil residue you got to do something with, right? The yield on that, like how much rubber you get per crude oil you put in, both of them, it's 66%. And then the byproduct is sometimes the same. If you're making rubber, you get as much byproduct as you do product. Alternate recipe. You make polymer resin on purpose, and then you make polymer resin into residual rubber and residual plastic. You still have heavy oil residue to deal with, but you get way more rubber and way more plastic out of it. And then your overall yields go to 72% and 108%. And you have less byproduct. Cool. That's 63% better rubber. So if you need rubber, it's totally worth doing this. It's only 9% more plastic, so it's not really worth setting all that up for plastic. Okay, so if you make fuel normally, it's also 66% yield, just like rubber and plastic. Nice baseline. The residual yield's 88. If you make dilute, it's 177. So you deal with the heavy oil residues, you actually get fuel outputs. Fuel, but it makes polymer resin. And we've got fuel, but it makes polymer resin. And we've got fuel, but it makes polymer resin. So we have to deal with the polymer resin. Otherwise, this is all gonna stop. You can just sink it. At that point, the yield is 0. It does nothing else for you. If you turn polymer resin into rubber and plastic, it's worth about half its weight in rubber and a third of its weight in plastic. We have fuel, and we can now express fuel in terms of fuel, plastic, and rubber. So we have making rubber as efficiently as we can with some byproduct fuel. We have making plastic, same way, and then we have making fuel the best way you can. So you get 108% rubber yield, 72% plastic yield, and 177% fuel yield. Right? Most people stop at like this 60-70% yield. I got to 177, I'm like, I'm not done. There's 2 more alternate recipes. Recycled plastic and recycled rubber. Every time we were making plastic, we had fuel byproduct, and every time we're making rubber, we have fuel byproduct. Well, this is a way to do something with plastic and fuel and rubber and fuel and then turn it into more plastic and rubber. So, hang on. So, how do you calculate the yield with a recycle going on in there? It depends on what you recycle and when and how you split this up. So you have to design the whole system first. So let's say we do our really efficient, we're making rubber and we make byproduct fuel, and then we mix those together, we make a plastic instead. You just add the recycle on the end. If you make as much as you can of polymer resin and fuel, instead of making rubber, instead of making recycled plastic, instead of making anything, if you just make fuel, because that's the highest yield, you can get 1,600 out of 600 crude oil. We're gonna start there. We're gonna turn the byproduct polymer resin into rubber, plastic, whatever, some kind of like starter. We're gonna take some of that fuel and recycle that into plastic. We've still got 1,400 fuel left, and now we're up to 400 plastic already. That's matching the vanilla yield. Take more fuel, recycle it into rubber. We've got 800 rubber, we still have 1,000 fuel left. Recycle it again, you've got 1,600 plastic and you still have 200 fuel.
again, why?
Well, because eventually we need tens of thousands of everything. So I want to tap one node and then make as much as you possibly can from each node, because it is limited. Well, yeah, I know, looks terrible, right? Imagine trying to balance this every time you need to, like, have a certain output. It's terrible. Instead, you solve the system of equations. You could make 1600 fuel if you had 1600 plastic from somewhere else into 3200 rubber. You could do the same thing with plastic. But our fuel supply is limited to 1600. So, the number of units making rubber is the cost of plastic plus the cost of fuel to make 60 rubber. Y is the number of units making plastic at the rate of 30 rubber plus 30 fuel to 60 plastic. And then this is our fuel constraint of 1600 at 30 rubber units and 30, like the fuel cost of the rubber units times the fuel cost of the plastic units. And you get a fuel constant of 53. That just says we can have 53 units running at a time at some balance between these two things. If you want to make as much, I should animate those. If you want to make as much like rubber as possible, you want the net output of the plastic of this plant to be 0. You want to make it just enough plastic to recycle into as much rubber as you can. So you set your rubber yield to 0, you solve all your equations, and you get 36 units running rubber and 18 units running plastic. You do that all the way through the entire thing, because eventually you aren't using the polymer resin. The only thing you're doing is recycling the other one. So the cost becomes half the cost of the half the cost of the half the cost of the yield is 300%. So basically you take the polymer resin at the end of the day, you use it to initiate this process, and then you just turn that into plastic or rubber as like a little bonus somewhere. Otherwise you can get 1600 of your target out of the fuel, or that'd be at 0 of the other one, or anywhere in between the two. Like a combination, 800 and 800, 600 and 1000, whatever. It'll just adapt this whole thing because it's just recycling them. So it's if you do this madness, it is 355% better than the default recipes. And if you thought residual was good, it's still 2 or 3 times better than the residual recipes. Oh, it's 1 crude oil node to like 20 refineries to make heavy oil residue, to 16 blenders to make fuel, to a meager 40 refineries each making rubber and plastic. But what that turns into is a full line of each just zipping away. The cat is eating the other cat's food, excusez-moi. Alright, come here. No, you're the outro. I don't care. Look at my pipes. What do you think? Do you like he's purring? You are soothed by the pipe network. I knew it. Yeah. Oh, that's stinky. All right.